Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 100 of In Their 20s with your host, Landon Campbell. I've been waiting a very long time to say that. If you are just now tuning into In Their 20s for the first time, this is a podcast where we have been speaking with the most influential people across multiple industries about what they did in their 20s. This podcast was created as a resource to share the best advice from the best people, specifically for 20-somethings who are going through a lot right now. Not only are we just now getting out of the pandemic, but there is economic uncertainty. Just look at the past 2-3 years. A lot has changed, and this podcast since day one has been there to support current 20-somethings to explore what people did in their 20s, and it's been a lot of fun. This episode is going to be a little different than what we usually do on In Their 20s. For the past 99 episodes, we're an interview-based show, so we've always invited on the best guests to speak about their experiences. I know, I've been the host, but I tell every guest that I tell a lot of people that I speak to about In Their 20s, this isn't necessarily my show. It's the show of all the guests that we've had on, and of course, our audience. But for today's episode, for episode 100, I wanted to do a reflection episode. Talk about why and how I created In Their 20s. Even before that, what did I think about podcasting? What kind of got me into the space of sharing advice like this? And everything I'm kind of working on now. So this episode, it's going to be a little longer, but we're going to break it down into 3 different parts. I'm going to again talk about my life before the podcast. And then part 2, we're going to talk about creating this podcast in their 20s. I'm going to also mention some insights about what I've learned about podcasting. So part 2 is going to be a wonderful place for you if you are interested in launching a podcast. I'm going to talk about my best advice personally as a host and how I've been able to scale this. And of course, in part 3, a lot of people probably listening don't know that my co-host unfortunately passed away last year. And that is something that maybe I haven't really spoken a whole lot about. I've been still trying to figure out everything myself. So, it's been something I've been working on with just close family and friends. But I wanted to be able to speak a little bit about everything in my experiences with that in part 3 of this episode and talk about some of the moments that have followed after that tragic news that really changed my life. So we'll start with part 1 here. I grew up kind of close to Silicon Valley, so my whole life I've been so intrigued by entrepreneurship. I've been obsessed with companies that really were able to grow from the Bay Area. Of course, the Apples, Facebooks, a lot of those. Even deeper than that, though, I've always been really intrigued with the stories of the founders. So that's just something I've always been interested in. Weird kid, my favorite movies growing up were biopics. Those are movies about other people. So like The Social Network, Steve Jobs, so movies like that. I've just always been intrigued with stories, and specifically those storytellers. So I moved from the Bay Area to Chicago for college. I believe it was 2016. The reason I looked at Chicago, I was applying to DePaul University. Just some context, back in high school and for the majority of my life, I was super involved in theater. And DePaul has a wonderful theater program. Early into my attendance at DePaul, I just kind of decided that it would be time to change, what I was focused on, and really wanted to try something new. And I think that that's something that a lot of 20-somethings do all the time, not just people in their 20s. You got to always be open to try new things. I was moving to a brand new city. I didn't know anybody in Chicago. So I said, okay, maybe it's time to switch things up. So I started by looking at the skills that I had gained through theater. And of course, this is going to sound like a very organized process. It wasn't as organized as I'm explaining it now, but I looked at the skills that I had gained in theater that I could apply to somewhere else, another industry. And when I broke it down, public speaking, of course, was one of them, communication, creative thinking. It kind of made sense that I would pursue corporate communications. So I ended up getting a degree in public relations and advertising at DePaul. But I'm someone that wants to learn a lot in a short amount of time, and I understand that I would grow to love my classes at DePaul, but I wanted to even, learn more beyond that. So I learned to value experiential learning very early, Ended up having 10 internships in college, and those internships gave me an opportunity to do a few things, make money. Working allowed me to have that freedom. But in addition, I was learning a shit ton during these internships and worked for some amazing people, and also got to work for some not that amazing people. And I think that's another great lesson. If you take on a lot of experiences early in your career, you can see what you like, but more importantly, you can find out the things that you don't like. I think that's super important. And of course, the internships continued to get cooler and cooler as I rose through college. My first internship at DePaul was unpaid, which is a sacrifice you have to make. I know there are a lot of people that say, ban unpaid internships. I won't give my opinion on that in this episode, but I will say I had an unpaid internship, and I think that it for someone that had no resume, no experience, I needed something to put down. So I really am grateful for that experience. But I would go on to intern at places like the Chicago Tribune and Motorola Solutions and Cameo. Got to work for a lot of amazing people and learned some great lessons from those individuals. And also working for a lot of these great leaders, I got to hear their personal stories. I got to hear how they got to where they were, the levels of success. And when I look back at creating this podcast, that's another example. The first example being my love for biopics. That's another example where I really became obsessed with these stories that people would be able to share. Not to say you need to model your life after one specific person, but I'm a big believer in take up all the information, hear up all the advice, and you can pick and choose what works best for you. But of course, that needs to be there. Along with having a lot of internships in college at the beginning, I also joined a fraternity, which I was only in for a year. I met a solid group of guys in that organization, and one of those individuals, his name was Michael Holmes, and we would end up becoming very close. You know, he had moved from the suburbs, super smart guy, one of the smartest guys I've ever known, and super hardworking too. I mentioned I had 10 internships, which is a little excessive. I mean, but he was the same fucking way. Like, he was super involved, not just to learn, but also to put himself through school. So we had a lot in common there. And we would end up being roommates. We lived in a few huge houses with our close group of friends. Sophomore year, we lived in a 10-bed, which was insane. You know, I understood early that Michael was super entrepreneurial like me. Around like junior, senior year, I just started doing freelance work. So I was doing marketing for local restaurants and bars in Chicago. And Michael was also, you know, trying to create another business. Back in high school, he had won like $25,000 for this business idea that he had come up with. And we would always just go back and forth about things that we could create, and, you know, would kind of toy around with some ideas. We had this one idea, two-sided marketplace for designers, local designers in Chicago, specifically streetwear designers. That ended up turning into, and this was like senior year as we were closing, a video series focused on Chicago streetwear designers. Because we were so curious and doing research for this other idea, we said, you know what, I think a lot of people would also be curious in this. So we wanted to create an interview series where we speak with 25 local streetwear designers in Chicago. And we had a location to start filming these. We had a small team. We were working on this with 3 other people, film students at DePaul University. We had rented out equipment at DePaul. The series was called EFFET, E-F-F-E-T, kind of a double entendre because NFA, I believe, means an impact in French. And EFFET, you know, EFFET, fuck it. You know, a lot of these Chicago streetwear designers were just getting dismissed and ignored, and a lot of larger companies were kind of stealing their ideas. So we noticed that a lot of these Chicago designers kind of had that EFFET mentality, just like keep going. We were really excited for this series, and I kid you not that we spent months and months prepping, as you do, for an interview of this caliber. I remember we had just wrapped up like our final kind of like intro interview, which was just done over Zoom at the time, funny enough, to prep them before we would bring them on site. We just wrapped that up, and we were literally about to start filming, and that same week, I don't know if you guys remember, but like when shit went haywire, big week of COVID, like where everything kind of got shut down. I don't remember what week that was, but there was like one specific week I remember. It was super scary. People were getting COVID. Schools were shutting down. Restaurants were shutting down. The city was like speaking on it. And we were like, wow, we're not going to put our team at risk. I mean, touching this equipment, we're not going to put the subjects at risk, coming to the location. If there's a risk that they could get COVID, which at the time, no one really knew a whole lot about. So pretty scary time. So Michael and I decided to stop the project. And well, not even stop, kind of pause the project, because we knew we wanted to come back to this, but we didn't know how long everything with COVID would last. But yeah, I guess kind of thinking back then, we just thought it would be a quick thing and we'd be able to go back to it soon. So I ended up going back to California around the same time to live with family. So we were just remote, kind of calling each other every day, because we got extra close during this project. We were already talking every day, having in-person meetings, etc. We were just talking every day, kind of like, damn, that sucks. Like, do you think there's an aspect of this project that we could do online? Could it turn into like a virtual series? I remember asking that question to our cinematographer, Isabel, and she was like, no. She thought that it would kind of take away some of the aesthetic that we were going for. And I totally agreed. And Michael and I would go back and forth, kind of saying, okay, like, is there another type of series that we could do remotely? This was now like a few weeks into the pandemic when I was back at home. We were just super bored, and it clearly wasn't going to work. So we slowly kind of ran into the idea of interviewing successful people to talk about what they did when they were in their 20s, keeping in mind that people like Elon, Jeff Bezos, Oprah, a lot of these individuals, well, actually all these individuals didn't have to deal with a pandemic in their 20s, but for certain they had to deal with some sort of issue or uncertainty when they were our age. So seeing that there was just like this mass depression, there were so many of our friends that were losing their jobs. I know it sucked that like I didn't get to walk for graduation. Yeah, I mean, there was just a general sadness. Michael and I thought that this would be a great way to help people out. And also, we wanted to have that advice as well. And also, last thing here, Michael and I had already signed on, thankfully, our post-grad jobs going into the pandemic. So we had extra time. There were a lot of people that were struggling, applying for companies, getting rejection after rejection after rejection. With the extra time, let's do something for others. With that being said, I think this is the perfect pivot for us to talk about how we started In Their 20s. So here's part 2. In Their 20s did not start as a podcast. We started it as a web series. And I kind of want to talk about the differentiation of the two. Because we were working on that video series on Chicago designers, we just wanted this to be a video-centric show, interview series on influential people about what they did in their 20s. So to be honest, we didn't really even prioritize the podcast side of this early. We didn't know much about podcasting. All in all, I'd probably listen to like one podcast before starting this. Yeah, I didn't know anything about the podcasting community as well. I think that's another important thing, because podcasting has been around for a while, and we haven't seen that much innovation since recently with a lot of this live podcasting and social audio, but the community has remained strong and like grown to become this really big thing, even though there are only about like 2.6 million shows. But just wanted to put that on the table there. We started this as a web series. So what did that mean? That just means that we wanted to prioritize the YouTube, the videos, and we kind of pushed the audio, so the RSS, the Spotify, Apple Podcast to the side. It was just like an extra thing that we had to upload to. So when we came up with the idea for In Their 20s, we'll start with like the first thing here. We knew what we wanted to do, and I remember even messaging like our group chat with the boys, like, Michael and I are going to start this idea. We didn't have a name for it, but Michael and I would just for a few days talk about the idea, kind of created a little list of people that we could interview on the show, people from our own networks. So professors we had at DePaul, people we had worked with while in college at these internships, because those would be the first few people that we wanted to have on the show. So this was, again, maybe like late March, early April in 2020. We didn't have a name for it. We could not come up with a cool name for In Their 20s until we weren't even trying to come up with a name. I think that's another thing. I have a lot of people always telling me they want to start a business and they focus on the name first and they want something that sounds fucking good. I tell people not to do that, like get just creating with the idea, start making content, start making a product, talk about it a lot with other people, internally with yourself, and it will come naturally. So like the first name we had come up with was like Coffee Chats, and I would have been so pissed if we went with that. Michael and I just kept talking about like, oh, what if we interviewed this person about what they did in their 20s, or what if we had this person talk about their 20s? And I don't remember the exact moment, but I think we were just going back and forth over text, and I said, dude, like, why don't we just call it In Their 20s? Originally, it was 3 words, which is now 1, but we just said, why don't we just call it In Their 20s? Because that's literally what we're doing. And those are the company names that I love the most. Not even company, those are the podcast names also that I love the most. Things that can clearly tell the audience what you're doing. And whenever people talk about In Their 20s, I think if you even listen to an episode, you have a general idea that it's about the 20s. We started to compile a list of a lot of these people that we wanted to interview, kind of talked about how we would do this. And I remember that we were talking about it for so many weeks. And finally I was all like, okay, let me get advice from one of my mentors. And I remember talking to one of my mentors, and he gave me a wonderful piece of advice. He just gave me 2 words, just start. So worry about everything else later. I think that's great advice, because I think people in their 20s, if you're coming up with an idea, a lot of times you just want to talk about it all the time. You fear failure. You kind of are like second guessing yourself. I think the best thing to do is just to start. Just get started. And then you can figure out everything later. Of course, no sporadic action. You want to have a plan, which we had a plan. We had multiple plans. So I think my mentor's advice was just get started, see what works, see what doesn't work, and keep going. So we began to reach out to some of the people that we wanted to have on the show. I believe the first person that we had on the show ever, his name was Zoaib Mirza. He was one of my favorite professors at DePaul. And I'm looking at some of my first emails to a lot of these people. Keep in mind, I had already had connections. Michael had connections to these individuals. And it disgusts me to look at some of these emails because they're so long. If you're reaching out to someone, whether you know them, you don't know them, keep shit short. Keep it simple, keep it short. I really try and create a compelling subject line. I really try and get just straight to the point in my emails, in the emails that I tell my team to send when we're getting guests on or sponsors. Keep it short and simple. And the way to do this is kind of reverse engineer it. If you were to receive this email, would you respond? Would you answer? And I know I have a super busy schedule, and I receive emails all the time, and I just don't read those super long ones. It's that simple, unless like we already have a pre-existing conversation and I'm requesting more information. That's different. But for cold outreach, you never want it to be super long. We had Zoaib Mirza on for our first episode. Spoke about his experiences as an immigrant. What Michael and I did, we were super smart, because not even on purpose, we were scared of creating content, because we understand that content takes a lot of time to create. It's stressful. We created an inventory of content, and that's a piece of advice I give to any creator or podcaster. Before you launch, have like maybe it's an arbitrary number. We had 10 interviews in our inventory, but find a number that kind of gives you some room to, you can start posting once you hit that 8th or 10th. You can start posting those, and then at the same time you're creating new content, because you never want to be like searching, for a new interview, or if someone were to cancel and you have no interview to post that week, then you're kind of screwed. So even to this day, I haven't done as well with it. Like we don't have 10 interviews in the interview inventory anymore, but I try and keep like 5 to 6 and sometimes even 7, just a number where I can feel comfortable. And not only do I just keep the files there, in my free time, I edit these, my team, I give them over to them, and like they help with the production side. So like these are ready to go. So again, not just files, these 5 to 7, whatever the number is, these interviews are ready to go at any time, so that if I even want to go back to these before posting them, and like if I notice a little issue, I love being able to do that. So that's just a great experience. So something that I really, really highly recommend. So started recording content around, April, and then maybe late April. And we didn't post our first episode until I believe it was June 15th, if that was a Monday in 2020. And the reason I remember that is because on June 12th, we had like the public announcement. We had this little like hype video for inTheir20s. Probably looked like shit. And that's another thing too. Like, not everything needs to look perfect at the beginning. Just do it. Just get it out there. But yeah, we started posting episodes. So Wade Mirza was our first. We had a woman named Michelle Hollis, I believe, for our second episode, who is the mom of one of my best friend's girlfriends, and a woman that I really, really respect. She's the president of a pretty large company, and a wonderful interview about work hard, play hard. Our third episode was with a man named Tomer Yogev. Tomer was Michael's professor, one of Michael's favorite professors in school. So I'd say like the first I don't even know the number, but like for a lot of these early interviews, because people are always asking how we get the Steve Wozniaks, the Ev Williams, the Jason Calacanises, and I will give you the same answer every time. It's consistency and building the foundation. And there were a lot of people that we had reached out to early that said no, they didn't want to come on the podcast because we only had like a few episodes under our belt. And to be honest, that's fine. Like I respect them for saying no, because it motivated us to keep making content. If you're upset that people are saying no to joining your podcast or using your product, don't take it too personal, because a lot of times people need to see that you take something serious before they take it serious. So I don't blame them. We had just, not that we had a reputation for quitting anything, but we had just started this podcast and everybody was starting podcasts. So I don't blame them for not wanting to join the show. 90% of podcasts quit after episode 3. That's for numerous reasons, but I remember texting Michael that quote or statistic very, very early, and just like, dude, we need to keep going. It's going to get better. We can't quit. So we did that. We did just that. We kept going. We had Beto O'Rourke very early on our show while he was running for president against Joe Biden, and I think that helped us get some notoriety and helped people kind of see, okay, I think I understand, because the episode was literally called "What Was Beto O'Rourke Doing in His 20s?" I think people started to kind of see and sense, okay, I kind of get what these guys are trying to do here. And we had like Tim Hardaway Sr., and then, the great guests kept going up. The best moments that Michael and I shared, there were so many during inTheir20s, but it was so nice to hear from our listeners, have them quote specific episodes and also relate it back to their lives. So we had multiple people come to Michael and I and say, hey, I heard this piece of advice in episode 15, and by hearing that from the guests you had on, I was motivated to move to a new city. So it was really clear early that we were onto something big. Not only were we sharing these awesome stories, but our guests were sharing actionable advice and insights that our audience would be able to take into account and kind of add to their own lives. So Michael and I really, really enjoyed this, and because of that, we were motivated to continue to work harder within inTheir20s and not just have it be a podcast. We wanted to kind of have it be more. So we're now going to transition to part 3 of this podcast. Michael and I were building a lot of cool things, and we had visions to do more, like create a job board. That's something that we always spoke about, do more speaking engagements, get more people to create podcasts. This is stuff that we always spoke about. Because of this, Michael and I would meet every single day. And then, we would have an official team meeting every Sunday to review our numbers, something that I still do to this day, to kind of check the data and see how we're growing. But we would, not only because we were best friends, but we would just be meeting every day to talk about inTheir20s. I say this just to say that I knew my friend very well, and around March 2021, close to a year after creating the show, just started to notice something was a little off with his behavior. I didn't know how to, I really didn't know how to understand it or just understand what was going on, but I had spoken with his roommate to, kind of see if he had noticed any behavioral issues that were that were different, about Michael. Because again, you speak with someone every single day, you notice little differences in their behavior. I didn't know if it was a thing where he just wasn't as motivated to do it anymore, or if there was something else that was wrong, because this was still, kind of the middle of the pandemic. And I know a lot of people were dealing with depression and having, issues there. So I remember speaking with his roommate about seeing if he noticed anything. And he also agreed, saying that he's been acting a little strange. So we spoke to Michael's family and recommended that he go home to get checked out and everything, and just see what the issue was. And he flew home. His family was living in Florida at the time. He went home, and within the span of a week, we found out what the issue was. It was cancer. My friend had developed brain cancer very unexpectedly. It was called astroglioma, I believe grade 3 astroglioma, which is a super, super rare type of brain cancer that only affects, and please don't quote me on this, but I believe 100,000 to 125,000 people around the world. So such a small amount of people. And just a shock. I remember where I was when I found out, and I remember my friends and I were just our close group of people, our roommates. We were just trying to figure everything out still, and because it just came out of nowhere. To think how difficult the year prior was with the pandemic, and to think about this beautiful thing that we were creating with the podcast to really combat against that. It was this was just tragic and unexpected, and I feel like every day something new had happened with it. Obviously, if you know someone who has been affected by cancer, things can decline very quickly, in a short amount of time. And I felt like that we didn't really have any clear answers about the status or what could happen. So it was very scary. And I would still talk to him as often as I could, every day. Obviously, some days were a little difficult for not just him, but also myself. But I was really excited. My friend group, we had organized the trip to go visit him in Florida. And because at this point, it had been a month between the time of when we found out that he had it, and a month after, we were able to go visit him because he had just started chemo. So we were going to go in waves. My friend group, we have about I think 9 to 10 of us, super, super close guys. Again, friendship made from the frat, but we were the really tight group, and we were going to go in waves. And I was the first wave to go with, I believe, my friend Edwin and Jonathan. And our flight was on Thursday, the week of, I believe, April 19th. And he had passed the Tuesday before, so 2 days before our flight, April 20th. Very unexpected, obviously. No one knew that would happen and that it would go that fast. I remember where I was when I found out the news as well, and just scary time. And I just learned a lot in those moments, that life is so unexpected, and someone can be here one day and gone the next. And I miss him every day. I think about him every day, and I just realize that he's with me every day too. And he's one of the main reasons why, I decided to keep this going. And it feels very good to have him by my side for In Their 20s still. And it feels, helpful that I'm able to use his microphone for every interview too, to honor him. So, this show is to honor him, and I miss my friend every day. When he, after he did pass, it was helpful to hear from a lot of people that they maybe never told Michael this personally, but he had helped them, in some way or another in classes, or they appreciated a piece of advice that he shared on the podcast, or, they had spoken to him briefly. And it's just, I wish that he could have been here to hear a lot of those things, but I know that he knows. So that just kind of keeps me going and really helps a lot. So I'm going to continue with part 3 here. I had to take a few days away from recording this just to think more about everything. And obviously I still want to talk about the moments that followed the podcast to wrap up part 3. So I believe the last episode that we had Michael for was episode 37. I just spoke about this briefly. I kind of felt like I was at a crossroads. Either I could not do the podcast anymore or continue to do the podcast. And I just thought back to this amazing thing that we had built, this thing that we had built from nothing, everything from the guests that we were choosing to the name of the podcast to our internship to, the news articles and interviews that we would do. This is something that Michael and I created together, and I just didn't feel like it was right to stop it when I could continue to honor his legacy, continue to build this, not just for me, but for us. And I decided to continue with the show. And of course, the interviews that followed after were extra difficult. But it was very helpful for me to stay distracted. I don't think there's one way to deal with death or something life-changing like that. I did what I felt like I needed to do. And if I were to go back to those moments, I wish that I did talk about it a little more often with people. Not even people who had gone through something like that, but it's bad to just keep that baggage stuck underneath your bed, especially when you're going through something that you had never gone through before. So I wish that I spoke about it more, but, I'm not perfect, and I have a platform now which allows me to do so. So it feels good to be able to, again, think about my friend every day and talk about him, and, even for people who didn't know him, make it seem that they did. So, having those interviews without Michael, though, did mean more work and more time, and I had to learn much better how to manage my time. So that's another piece of advice. If you're looking to make a podcast, if you're looking to take on a side hobby or whatever it is, you still need to perform in what you do during your quote-unquote 9 to 5 and any other activities that you have. So I think that it is really important I don't even believe in a work-life balance. It's a work-life harmony. You need to know specifically, waking up in the day, what your plans are for that day. I know unexpected things happen, but I like to start my mornings with a clear eye of my calendar, knowing exactly what I'm supposed to do, and then actually physically writing the things that I want to get to that day. And some things will come up, new responsibilities come along, but can't stress that enough, how important it is to start your day productively and be be good at managing time, delegating, whatever it is. So through In Their 20s, this podcast has done so much for me. And one thing that it's probably done the most for me professionally is I've gotten to really learn a lot about tech, entrepreneurship, and venture capital. Not only have we built an audience on In Their 20s that, enjoy our interviews about how do you start a company or how do you raise capital, but myself, I've really enjoyed it a lot. What do I like about VC? So much innovation comes from both tech and VC. And I don't think there are any other industries like that. VC, they're funding the future. So sometimes, they're investing in things that don't exist yet, markets that haven't been proven yet. But that's when you get Ubers. That's when you get Airbnbs. That's when you get these category defining companies. So I just think it's such a unique space. And the second thing is, I don't think there should be one specific way to break into venture capital anymore. Before it was you need to have like investment banking background or go to this top college to become a VC. And I've had so many VCs on In Their 20s who, didn't have a traditional path to getting into venture. I had Jason Calacanis on, who went from journalist to capital allocator. I just interviewed someone today who went from selling rugs to venture capital. I've interviewed actors to VC. I've interviewed athletes to VC. I think that VCs just need to be really good support systems for founders, need to really have the capacity to help them tell their own stories. It's more than just, funding these companies. It's more than giving capital, which is an important part of it. But it's been great to hear the value that a lot of these VCs are able to give to founders. So I say all that just, again, because it was clear. I mean, if you know anything about the show, I've had a lot of VCs on it, and it's something that I became really interested in. And also just became really interested in media through launching this podcast, not just social media, but, these other mediums, newsletters, podcasting, legacy media versus these influencers and content creators. So I started to discover these large areas of interest through the podcast. And this is all going to make sense in a second, just trying to give context. So for episode 40, this is when I was interviewing on my own. I interviewed Jason Calacanis. Jason Calacanis, who I just mentioned, went from a journalist. He had this publication called the Silicon Alley Reporter when he was in his 20s, where he would interview founders, and, he kind of originated the New York tech beat, sharing information about that, and created such a large network of, startups, founders, etc., from this publication, to where he actually ended up deploying capital. So he's one of the most iconic journalists to VC capital allocator type person. And he was one of the first investors in Uber, for example. And he, I believe, offered the opportunity to 25 of his friends, and only 3 of them said yes. And he turned the iconic stories 100,000 into 100 million. But he's invested in way more successful companies as well. And it was a wonderful interview. Had a wonderful time talking to him. I still remember the big quote that stood out from our interview was, "Do the work before you have the job." He knew he wanted to be successful. He knew that he wanted to do these certain things. But no one's just going to give you a shot or give you things for free. Sometimes that happens. But most of the time you need to prove that you can do the job before you have it. So what does that mean? That means you building your own network. That means you building a foundation, building a community, building an audience. So it was a great episode. Fast forward a little bit, for episode 50, I had on Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple. And I thought that was a huge moment for not just me, but for the podcast, for this thing that Michael and I had created. And I was, in my reflection mode, and said, wow, shit, I would have never gotten here if not for all the previous 49 guests that we had. So whenever I have hit certain milestones, I try and do what I'm about to tell you. I connect and reach back out to all the individuals that I've interviewed, not asking for anything, just to say thank you. Thank you for seeing something in this before a lot of other people did. Thank you for your time, which, some might say is only a 30-minute interview, but no, that's time that they could have been spending doing anything else, but they decided to come on this show and help me build in their 20s. And so I emailed Jason. Hadn't spoken to him at all from the time of our interview to Steve Wozniak's. Just to give you some context of time, I believe I posted my interview with Jason April of 2021, and my episode with Steve Wozniak was posted July of 2021. So a few months had gone by. Emailed him, hey, just want to say thank you so much for joining the show. Look who I just interviewed, Steve Wozniak. And, hope everything's going well. If there's ever anything I can do for you, let me know. And he emails me back, wow, this is so cool. What do you do full time right now? And at the time I was working at Motorola, a company that I have so much respect for and love, and worked with some amazing people. 2 of them I actually just saw a few days ago. But I told him, I was at Motorola doing something that, wasn't related to media, wasn't related to VC, which, I knew eventually I'd be wanting to go fully into. And he told me about this company that he has, one of the first companies that he had built, Inside.com. And he told me that he was looking for someone just like me, someone who could build events, podcasts, and community, I believe is what he said, and podcasts. So those 4 things. I lit up when I saw that. I was like, okay, wow, totally. I'd love to do that. Are you kidding me? For multiple reasons. A, I just told you guys that I was interested in media, VC, Inside works with VCs and it's a media company. So I said that would be kind of like a perfect fit for me. But in addition, I viewed Jason as a mentor back when I interviewed him, because I loved his journey and I felt like commonality between like what I was trying to do with my life. Him going from journalist to capital allocator in 2021, 2022, that looks like a podcaster, to VC or capital allocation. So I thought that it would be a crazy cool opportunity to work for him and learn directly from him, and even bigger than an interview. So it didn't really take that hard of a consideration on my part. Like, I knew immediately when he said that, and joined the Inside team just as a host for events, and I've been there since September, and now I am one of our executives, and I manage our virtual media, so our virtual events, and we're going to be organizing some large summits. I have my own podcast at Inside as well called Venturing in VC, because I'm so interested in VC. I saw this as a wonderful opportunity for me to connect with top VCs and have a sole show for this. So Venturing in VC, I interview the top VCs about their journeys, routines, lessons, and how they got into VC. And I've made some amazing connections. And from Venturing in VC, I even had an opportunity to start angel investing alongside two firms. And that's, obviously that number is probably going to go up in the future, because I'm in a unique situation now where like I speak with so many founders a day, whether they're in their 20s or, I take a lot of networking calls just throughout the weekend in my free time. So I have like a lot of founders, aka deal flow, and I have these connections with a lot of VCs. I know exactly what they look for. I know exactly the average check size that they're writing. I know exactly the types of founders, I should say, that they look for. So it's kind of been fun to be this connector. But the reason I have these opportunities is all from the podcast. So let me go way, way back now. Did I see myself getting all these opportunities from the podcast? Originally just one podcast, but now two podcasts. No, I'm going to be honest and candid and say no. But I told you earlier that I identified like these areas of interest, media, professional development, startups, and VC. So I'm very thankful and lucky. I feel like I've been able to, through these podcasts, find a unique way to, start to build a track record with my investments, build my brand, help out founders and learn more about VC. So we're not going to talk about, like what I see myself doing in 5 to 10 years, but what I will say is I'm just so blessed right now. I really love what I do. I get to meet constantly some amazing people, and it's all rooted in storytelling. So that's your full circle moment. I am someone who loves sharing stories, and I think storytelling is one of the most important things that someone can do. It's what pushes culture. It's what keeps heritage. I mean, stories are everywhere. Everywhere you go, you will see a story. You can be moved and motivated and pushed forward by a story. Stories are in music, they're in art, they're everywhere, and they're in podcasts. So really lucky that I get to share these amazing stories. I get to learn something new every single day, and I get to meet some very influential people. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you for listening to this very special episode of mine. I told you in the beginning it was going to be different. And for episode 101, we'll be back to exactly what we've been doing for now over 100 episodes, which is crazy, crazy cool. Just feels good, just to be able to reflect. This was a good time to reflect for me. And I hope that throughout listening to this, you maybe want to make a podcast, or you want to work on that hobby that you've been talking about for a while. Or you want to find a new mentor. I mean, I tried to share a lot of my key lessons and advice in this that I hope you can kind of apply to your own life, because I don't think you need to follow one specific sort of structure in your 20s or in your life, I think it's important to hear multiple perspectives and kind of pick and choose what works best for you. Just kind of quickly looking into the future of In Their 20s, I'm just so excited. We have some crazy cool episodes coming out. We don't want to spoil anything yet, but I'm just telling you guys right now that you're going to be shocked to see who we have coming on. All right, everybody. See you next week.